Imagine a kidnapper who demands $6 million in cryptocurrency but intentionally destroys every single way for you to actually pay them. They send meticulously crafted emails to local media outlets outlining highly specific, unreleased details about the crime scene. They note the exact location of a smartwatch left behind in the silent house. They describe a damaged headlight on a vehicle parked securely in the garage. They even list the specific clothing the victim was wearing when she vanished into the cold night. They prove they were inside the home. They prove they took her, but they do not provide a single shred of proof of life. And even more chillingly, they provide absolutely no encrypted communication channel, no secure routing network, no anonymous drop site to actually receive the millions of dollars they are so aggressively demanding. Why would a highly sophisticated extortionist completely sever their only avenue for a massive payday? This is the central baffling paradox currently facing the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Division. When the first threatening demands arrived, investigators quickly realized this was not a standard snatch and grab operation designed for quick, untraceable cash. It was a complex psychological labyrinth where digital data was being weaponized against a desperate family and a panicked global audience. The perpetrators created a perfect echo chamber of terror, loud enough to capture the attention of the entire nation, but completely silent when it came to offering a viable resolution. They left behind a digital vacuum that continues to confound some of the most advanced cyber analysts and behavioral profilers in the world. Every standard protocol for hostage negotiation has been rendered completely useless by a digital ghost who simply refuses to open a line of communication. In a baffling case where every single digital footprint immediately turns into an absolute dead end, we critically need to look much closer at the raw data and the sinister behavior hiding behind the glowing screen. If you want to carefully follow the actual criminal forensics instead of the wild internet rumors, hit subscribe and join me in Tracking Evil with John. We will strip away the sensationalism and examine the absolute facts of a mystery that is currently unfolding in real time. We will analyze the very text that has paralyzed law enforcement. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie lived a life defined by quiet, highly predictable routines in the affluent, sun-drenched neighborhoods of the Catalina foothills located in Tucson, Arizona. Her daily existence was remarkably ordinary and exceptionally peaceful for a woman carefully navigating her mid-80s. It was characterized by slow, quiet mornings and the tranquil, secure isolation that the sprawling, wealthy desert community typically provided to its older residents. But beneath this calm, steady veneer of a highly idyllic retirement lay a massive, completely unavoidable risk profile. She was the loving mother of Savannah Guthrie, who happens to be one of the absolute most recognizable and widely watched television broadcasters working in the entire United States. This staggering, incredibly sharp contrast between a quiet, largely unguarded life living in the remote desert and the glaring, relentless spotlight of national fame creates a profound, underlying tension that criminal investigators are now frantically forced to untangle. Did this extreme level of secondary, inherited fame make the elderly woman a highly coveted, high-value target for a meticulously planned, professionally executed abduction, or was she simply the tragic victim of a random, opportunistic residential intrusion that somehow went horribly, irreparably wrong in the middle of the night? Savannah herself had previously voiced deep, highly public concerns regarding the physical safety of her extended family, specifically due to her extremely high-profile media status. It was a chilling, lingering fear that now seems to have tragically materialized into cold reality. Yet, in the quiet, mundane weeks directly leading up to the final day of January in the year 2026, there were absolutely no recognizable warnings of any kind. There were no strange, anonymous phone calls disturbing the peace. There were no suspicious, unfamiliar vehicles lingering out on the quiet, winding residential street. And there were absolutely no menacing, threatening letters quietly left inside the home mailbox. The entire neighborhood remained comfortably bathed in its usual, undisturbed, wealthy, quiet. The environment felt entirely safe and protected. The only formally documented anomaly, the only faint whisper of the terrifying nightmare that was about to unfold, was captured in absolute, chilling silence by a standard home security camera. Sometime in the pitch dark hours, a solitary, unidentified male figure suddenly materialized on the immediate property. He wore a dark mask, completely obscuring his facial features, and carried a distinct, large Ozark Trail brand backpack. He simply stood there, an anonymous, looming silhouette perfectly framed against the dark desert night. He looked directly and deliberately into the glass lens of the Ring doorbell camera before the recording device was abruptly and violently disabled. He did not immediately force entry while the camera was actively recording the scene. He made absolutely no audible demands to anyone sleeping inside. He just stood there and watched, acting as a silent, patient predator, carefully assessing his target environment. The captured footage reveals a chillingly calm, highly deliberate presence. The unknown man moved with a terrifying sense of cold purpose. This silent surveillance, this unseen observation occurring in the dead of the night, leaves behind a profound, suffocating sense of impending dread. The true horror did not begin with a loud, violent crash through a glass window. It began with a patient, unblinking phantom lingering quietly just outside the threshold of safety, simply waiting in the cold dark to strike. The trap was set, the illusion of desert safety permanently shattered on the incredibly dark night of January 31st, 2026. It was during these quiet, unseen hours that Nancy Guthrie vanished completely from her Catalina Foothills residence. When the sun rose the following morning, the agonizing reality of her sudden absence began to set in. By February 1st, the local police department officially received the panicked missing person report. Initially, authorities might have hoped they were simply looking for a confused elderly woman who had perhaps wandered off into the familiar neighborhood and lost her way. However, that fleeting, desperate hope evaporated almost the very moment investigators physically stepped across the threshold of the Guthrie home. The scene they encountered inside did not suggest a simple, accidental wandering. It screamed of a sudden, forced, and highly unnatural departure. The physical evidence left behind was stark, deeply disturbing, and immediately escalated the situation. The absolute basic necessities required for any voluntary departure were all completely abandoned. Her personal purse, containing vital identification and payment methods, remained untouched inside the house. Her cellular phone, the single most critical lifeline to the outside world and her deeply concerned family, was left sitting in the quiet residence. Furthermore, her personal vehicle remained parked, completely undisturbed, in its usual spot. An 84-year-old woman simply does not walk away into the harsh Arizona desert in the middle of a cold winter night without her money, without her communication device, and without her reliable transportation. But the most chilling discovery, the detail that instantly transformed this case from a standard missing person search into a full-blown, urgent criminal investigation, was found near the primary point of entry. Investigators discovered distinct, terrifying traces of blood located ominously close to the front door. This single, grim physical finding confirmed the absolute worst fears of everyone. Violence had undoubtedly occurred within the supposed safety of those walls. The presence of blood violently erased any lingering theories of a medical episode causing her to wander. Someone else had been inside that house. Someone had confronted her, and a physical altercation, however brief, had taken place right near the exit. The local police immediately secured the entire property, transforming the quiet retirement home into an active, highly restricted crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the desert landscaping as forensic teams in protective suits began meticulously combing through every square inch of the residence, desperately searching for fingerprints, DNA, and any microscopic clue the masked intruder might have carelessly left behind. The sudden, violent nature of the physical scene presented a terrifying puzzle. Who would violently target an 84-year-old woman in her own home? Was it a robbery that escalated into a kidnapping when the intruder was unexpectedly startled? Or Was the extraction of Nancy Guthrie the primary calculated goal all along? The physical evidence at the immediate scene offered terrifying confirmation of an attack but provided absolutely zero answers regarding the identity or the ultimate motive of the attacker. The entire community was plunged into a state of sudden dread. The police were initially hunting for a ghost, a violent phantom who had managed to slip away into the vast darkness with a highly prominent victim. For days, the physical investigation seemed hopelessly stalled, yielding no immediate suspects and no clear direction for the panicked family to focus their desperate pleas. But then, the absolute silence of the agonizing investigation was abruptly and shockingly broken. The answers the police were so desperately seeking did not come from a recovered fingerprint or a forgotten piece of physical evidence left at the bloody scene. Instead, the explanation arrived weeks later in the form of a terrifying digital transmission from the shadows, a message that would completely alter the entire trajectory of the hunt and plunge the federal authorities into an unprecedented, highly complex cyber nightmare that no one saw coming. The local police were completely outmatched. The rules of the game had violently changed. Throughout the grueling first half of February, the agonizing silence surrounding the mysterious disappearance was suddenly shattered by an unprecedented digital assault. Out of nowhere, highly sophisticated electronic ransom notes began arriving at the busy inboxes of local Arizona media outlets, including the television station KOLD, and shockingly, the national entertainment news giant TMZ. The demands embedded within these digital messages were astronomically high and intensely specific. The unseen sender was aggressively demanding a staggering $6 million, and they explicitly required the massive payment to be delivered entirely in decentralized cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. But the sheer dollar amount was not what sent a freezing chill down the spines of the seasoned federal investigators. It was the terrifying, undeniable knowledge contained within the meticulously typed text. These were not generic amateurish threats copied from a movie script. The emails were described by analysts as being absolutely perfect regarding their spelling, syntax, and grammatical structure, indicating a highly educated and deeply methodical author. More importantly, the messages contained devastating proof of detail. The anonymous sender clearly outlined highly specific, intensely private information about the crime scene that law enforcement had intentionally and strictly withheld from the eager public. The terrifying emails accurately noted the exact, precise location of an Apple Watch that had been left behind inside the Guthrie residence. The sender casually described a very specific, undocumented piece of damage regarding a broken headlight on a vehicle, securely parked inside the private garage. Most horrifically, the digital messages accurately listed the exact specific articles of clothing that the 84-year-old victim was wearing on the very night she violently vanished into the dark. These unreleased, tightly guarded forensic details functioned as a horrifying digital signature. They absolutely proved, beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt, that whoever was sitting behind the keyboard typing these extortion demands had either been physically standing inside the house on that fateful night or was currently holding the missing woman captive. The sender possessed the intimate, undeniable knowledge of the true perpetrator. They had the confirmed information, they allegedly had the terrified victim, and they had a very clear, massive financial demand. But when elite behavioral analysts and seasoned former federal agents, including experts like Robin Dreeke and Gregory Vecchi, meticulously reviewed the chilling text of the ransom letters, they immediately identified a massive, glaring psychological red flag. It was a terrifying omission that completely contradicted the established logic of any high-stakes kidnapping operation. Within all the perfect grammar and the hyper-specific details regarding the Apple Watch and the broken headlight, there was absolutely no proof of life. If this incredibly sophisticated extortionist truly wanted to successfully collect a massive $6 million cryptocurrency payday, why would they intentionally refuse to prove that their incredibly valuable hostage was actually still breathing? In the tense, high-stakes world of kidnap and ransom negotiations, proof of life is the absolute foundational currency of the entire transaction. Without it, the desperate family has zero incentive to transfer the massive funds. Yet, this highly methodical digital ghost completely ignored this fundamental rule. The absolute lack of a photograph or a voice recording created a sickening void. Do you think a highly professional, calculated kidnapper would simply forget to include a basic proof of life in their meticulously crafted email? Please leave your immediate thoughts down below in the comment section, because the deeply baffling digital anomalies that the federal cyber investigators uncovered next are even more strange and completely defy all rational explanation. The federal agents realized they were not just negotiating for a vulnerable life, they were actively fighting a completely faceless, highly advanced enemy who was intentionally rewriting the long-established rules of criminal extortion. The meticulous nature of the demands, combined with the terrifying absence of the voice of the victim, forced the specialized cyber division to question everything they thought they knew about the true motives of the suspect. The carefully constructed emails were designed to induce maximum psychological terror, proving absolute control over the crime scene while simultaneously withholding the only piece of evidence that could actually resolve the agonizing standoff. While the terrifying digital ransom notes were actively paralyzing the local authorities, the deeply traumatized family made their incredibly desperate position completely clear to the public. Savannah publicly pleaded with the unseen captors, explicitly stating their absolute willingness to cooperate and confirming they would pay the massive ransom. They just desperately wanted her mother returned safely. As the intense public scrutiny mounted, law enforcement officially cleared the immediate family of any suspicion on February 16th, according to reports from national media outlets. This critical public announcement permanently eliminated any lingering, cynical theories regarding an elaborate inside job and firmly redirected the entirety of the massive federal apparatus strictly toward the anonymous cyber threat. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Cyber Division was fully deployed to relentlessly hunt down the digital footprint of the extortionist. Highly specialized federal agents immediately began performing deep forensic analyses on the metadata hidden beneath the surface of the terrifying emails sent to the local news station. They were actively searching for any microscopic slip, a carelessly routed internet protocol address, a hidden time zone stamp, or a completely unmasked server connection that could instantly pinpoint the exact physical location of the keyboard being used by the alleged kidnapper. Simultaneously, the physical investigation regarding the chilling Ring doorbell camera footage was generating a truly overwhelming, chaotic avalanche of public data. The haunting, silent image of the masked man carrying the large Ozark Trail backpack had been widely broadcasted across the entire nation. This massive exposure resulted in an astonishing influx of over 13,000 individual tips, rapidly flooding into the federal tip lines from terrified citizens across the country. Agents were forced to painstakingly sift through thousands of potential sightings, aggressively cross-referencing the specific brand of the backpack, analyzing the exact height and physical build of the silent intruder, and desperately chasing down thousands of well-meaning but ultimately useless leads. But despite the massive, unprecedented volume of public assistance, the intense digital and physical dragnet was yielding absolutely nothing. The silent man from the camera footage remained a completely unidentified, untraceable ghost. In a truly desperate, highly advanced attempt to locate the elderly victim using unconventional means, investigators reportedly deployed incredibly sophisticated tracking technology. According to the Drop Dead Serious podcast, federal agents utilized a highly classified technology known as Bluefly. This incredibly specialized digital system was allegedly deployed in a frantic attempt to actively detect and trace the extremely faint electronic signals constantly emitted by the specific medical pacemaker implanted inside the chest of the victim. It was a brilliant, highly innovative application of medical surveillance technology repurposed for an urgent criminal hunt. If the kidnapper had managed to completely isolate her cellular phone and her digital devices, they might not have realized that her own beating heart was actively transmitting a traceable electronic signature into the surrounding area. The federal teams aggressively deployed this advanced scanning technology across the sprawling desert regions and major transportation corridors. Furthermore, massive federal databases were actively cross-referenced. Agents meticulously scoured thousands of hours of high-definition surveillance footage captured at numerous border crossing checkpoints, desperately searching for any vehicle matching the profile or any facial recognition hit that might indicate the suspects were attempting to move the victim internationally. They aggressively subpoenaed purchase records from local sporting goods stores and tactical equipment suppliers, desperately looking for anyone who had recently purchased that specific Ozark Trail backpack or the distinct dark clothing worn by the silent intruder on the security video. They threw the absolute full, terrifying weight of the United States federal government surveillance apparatus at this single baffling disappearance. Yet, in spite of the 13,000 public tips, the advanced metadata analysis of the Ransom emails, the extensive border camera reviews, and the incredibly innovative deployment of the pacemaker tracking technology, the entire investigation aggressively slammed into a massive, impenetrable brick wall. Every single query returned, absolutely no hits. Every single digital avenue abruptly terminated in a frustrating dead end. The alleged kidnapper was completely invisible. They had successfully managed to aggressively demand millions of dollars from a highly famous family while completely evading one of the most sophisticated, well-funded, and technologically advanced intelligence gathering networks on the entire planet. The absolute lack of any digital exhaust was deeply terrifying. The suspect was not just lucky, they were demonstrating a level of extreme operational security that completely baffled veteran cyber agents. They existed entirely off the grid, leaving behind no digital residue, no financial transactions, and no traceable communication patterns. This complete digital silence in the modern era is nearly impossible to maintain, yet this unknown adversary was executing it flawlessly, leaving the desperate family trapped in an agonizing, unending nightmare of uncertainty. On February 18th, the already agonizing digital standoff took a profoundly more convoluted and terrifying turn. Fresh electronic correspondence suddenly breached the secure servers of media outlets, escalating the unbearable tension surrounding the case to an entirely new level. This secondary wave of demands completely abandoned the original financial request parameters, insisting instead on an entirely different, highly specific, and notoriously opaque form of alternative decentralized currency. This sudden, jarring pivot in their extortion strategy suggested an adversary who was either rapidly refining their illicit laundering protocols in real time to evade advancing federal tracking algorithms, or far more concerningly, it indicated a fragmented criminal group actively losing internal coordination and panicking under the intense national spotlight. But the rapidly evolving digital strategy was quickly overshadowed by a rapidly expanding physical and geographical terror. The terrifying possibility that the perpetrators were actively planning to transport their high-profile target entirely outside of domestic federal jurisdiction prompted a drastic, unprecedented international response from the investigative teams. According to the entertainment news organization TMZ, the mounting desperate fear of an international smuggling operation forced law enforcement to reportedly initiate urgent, high-level communications with government authorities located in Mexico. They were desperately attempting to preemptively secure vast stretches of southern crossing points and rapidly expand the international surveillance net before the porous borders could be successfully breached by the unseen captors. The physical law enforcement dragnet was being stretched to its absolute breaking point across multiple nations, yet the central, most glaring contradiction of the entire criminal operation remained stubbornly, inexplicably unresolved. The desperate relatives possessed the exact required wealth to end the nightmare and had already publicly broadcasted their absolute, unconditional willingness to surrender the massive fortune immediately. They were acting as entirely compliant participants trapped within a high-stakes extortion plot, agonizingly waiting for the final, explicit instructions on exactly how and where to transfer the requested funds. But the unseen, architect of this escalating terror utterly refused to provide a secure digital drop location, an anonymous dark web routing address, or any remotely functional mechanism to actually receive the massive fortune they were so aggressively demanding in their public letters. This specific behavioral anomaly completely shattered every established historical paradigm of organized financial crime. Career criminals execute elaborate, highly risky abductions strictly for immense profit. They willingly endure the massive, life-altering risks associated with a high-profile kidnapping specifically to get paid and vanish, deliberately and permanently severing the only viable conduit for that exact payment is functionally irrational. It is the tactical equivalent of violently robbing a fortified bank vault and then intentionally, permanently welding the heavy steel door shut from the inside before the money can be extracted. The highly specialized behavioral analysis units studying these erratic communications were suddenly forced to confront a profoundly disturbing alternative hypothesis. What if the staggering monetary demand broadcasted to the media was never the actual primary objective of the violent intrusion? What if the elaborate, highly sophisticated digital maze involving shifting alternative currencies and aggressive media manipulation was nothing more than a meticulously constructed theater brilliantly designed to intentionally distract the entire federal apparatus from a much darker, strictly physical reality playing out locally? This terrifying question began to fundamentally alter the core direction of the massive manhunt. The investigators had to critically evaluate whether they were chasing a brilliant international cyber syndicate or simply being expertly manipulated by a localized predator using advanced digital tactics as a convenient smokescreen. If you were leading the federal task force in this deeply confusing situation, would you continue to follow the invisible, shifting money trail? Or would you force your teams to refocus entirely on the physical remnants of the violent extraction? If you feel this unprecedented investigation is violently deviating from all rational, established criminal logic, the sheer absurdity of a highly organized extortionist who actively refuses to be paid began to look significantly less like a careless tactical error and substantially more like a deliberate, incredibly sinister campaign of deliberate misdirection. The federal teams were no longer just searching for a missing woman, they were actively battling a psychological warfare campaign designed to exhaust their resources and shatter the hope of the waiting family. The digital breadcrumbs were intentionally leading them into a vast, empty wilderness, forcing the most seasoned investigators to reconsider the very foundation of the crime they were attempting to solve. The paradigm of the entire investigation had completely shifted from a high-tech digital ransom negotiation back to a brutal physical homicide inquiry masked by a layer of brilliant cyber deception. The authorities were no longer waiting for a secure payment link to materialize. They were desperately searching the physical earth for a tragic resolution while the digital ghosts continued to mock their efforts from the impenetrable shadows of the dark web. The most sophisticated intelligence apparatus was ultimately defeated by a suspect who simply chose to unplug and walk away into the darkness, leaving a trail of fabricated digital evidence designed specifically to lead the smartest minds into an absolute, inescapable labyrinth of false hope and wasted resources. The specialized behavioral profilers began to systematically deconstruct the glaring contradictions that had paralyzed the initial phase of the investigation. When they critically analyzed the terrifying paradox of possessing incredibly accurate, unreleased crime scene details while simultaneously refusing to establish a functional payment channel and utterly failing to produce a verifiable photographic or audio recording proving the hostage was alive, a chilling new reality crystallized. The meticulously typed ransom correspondence was most likely a highly sophisticated red herring. The leading federal experts publicly presenting their analyses on national television networks proposed a devastatingly grim alternative theory. The terrifying nighttime intrusion was potentially never intended to be a strategic, high-value abduction for financial gain. Instead, the physical evidence strongly suggested a completely different breed of localized violence. They theorized a highly probable scenario involving a targeted home invasion that escalated into unintended catastrophic violence when the intruder was unexpectedly confronted by the elderly resident in the dark hallway. In this horrifying operational model, the elaborate digital extortion campaign launched weeks later was nothing more than a desperate, highly calculated diversionary tactic engineered to consume federal resources and push the active search radius thousands of miles away from the actual localized crime scene. Alternatively, investigators had to consider the sickening possibility of opportunistic digital scavengers. It was entirely plausible that highly skilled, deeply unethical cyber scammers had somehow managed to illegally access unsecured local police databases or intercept encrypted initial responder transmissions during the chaotic first hours of the investigation. Armed with those stolen, highly guarded forensic details, these unseen parasites could easily craft the terrifyingly accurate emails attempting to blindly extort a desperate family for millions of dollars while having absolutely zero physical connection to the actual disappearance. This terrifying duality meant that the looming anonymous figure captured by the exterior surveillance lens and the highly articulate, invisible author crafting the perfect grammatical sentences from an untraceable server might not even be the same individual. The federal task force was suddenly forced to hunt two entirely separate phantoms operating in completely different realms. One was a physical predator who vanished into the cold desert night, and the other was a digital opportunist, perfectly manipulating the resulting tragedy for a chaotic, impossible payday. The realization that the emails were likely a fabricated smokescreen completely shattered the fragile hope that the victim was being kept alive as valuable leverage. If the financial demands were entirely fake, then the fundamental reason for keeping an abducted witness breathing instantly evaporated. The intense, highly sophisticated digital noise that had consumed the nation for weeks was ultimately masking a horrifying physical truth. The perpetrator was using the complex language of cyber extortion not to negotiate a release, but to buy invaluable time and distance. The brilliant tactical move was not the encrypted emails themselves, but the absolute impenetrable digital silence that immediately followed them. By refusing to engage in any two-way communication, the author completely neutralized the most advanced tracing algorithms deployed by the intelligence community. They understood that engaging in a negotiation would eventually expose a routing vulnerability, so they simply dropped the digital bomb and permanently severed the connection. This chilling strategy transformed the very absence of data into the most devastating weapon of all. The silence was not a mistake. It was the ultimate, impenetrable shield, protecting a terrible secret. If you want to continuously analyze the subtle, terrifying red flags of complex criminal cases from a strictly forensic and behavioral perspective, instead of getting lost in wild, baseless internet conspiracy theories, please make sure you have subscribed to Tracking Evil with John. We will relentlessly expose the calculated misdirection used by predators to evade justice and examine the raw, unfiltered evidence they leave behind. Stripping away the complex layers of behavioral theory and advanced digital forensics brings us back to the incredibly harsh, unyielding reality of the present moment. As the calendar aggressively pushes toward the final days of March in the year 2026, the massive, highly publicized manhunt remains officially classified as a completely open, highly active, and deeply frustrating ongoing investigation. The sprawling federal command centers and the localized tactical teams have not formally closed the agonizing books on this unprecedented mystery. Despite the relentless application of cutting-edge surveillance technology and thousands of dedicated man-hours, the fundamental status of the case has tragically stagnated, offering no closure and no definitive answers. The devastating emotional toll this prolonged, agonizing uncertainty has inflicted upon the prominent broadcasting personality and her extended family is entirely unimaginable. They remain permanently trapped in a cruel, unending state of psychological limbo that defies all logical comprehension. It is a specific, torturous kind of hell where immense personal wealth, unparalleled national media influence, and an absolute desperate willingness to sacrifice anything and everything are rendered completely, horrifyingly useless by an invisible adversary. They stand ready at the digital altar, desperately holding the massive requested fortune, actively begging for instructions, but there is absolutely no one waiting at the other end of the encrypted line to finalize the agonizing transaction or offer a glimmer of hope. The ultimate tragedy of this high-profile disappearance starkly highlights a terrifying vulnerability inherent within our modern, hyper-connected society. The highly specialized federal cyber divisions can successfully crack complex encryption algorithms. They can meticulously trace layered server bounces across multiple international continents, and they can completely reconstruct deleted metadata files from corrupted hard drives. However, there is a hard, terrifying, and absolute limit to the power of pure technology in the face of human cunning. When an intelligent adversary fundamentally understands exactly how to exist completely outside the established digital grid, or when they deliberately utilize modern technological communication solely as a disposable weapon of calculated misdirection rather than a tool for actual negotiation, the most advanced intelligence gathering machines become entirely paralyzed. The massive, overwhelming volume of corrupted data, the thousands of useless public sightings, and the perfectly constructed, highly deceptive emails ultimately amount to nothing but blinding, chaotic white noise. The sprawling digital infrastructure that was originally built to closely monitor and protect modern society was effortlessly manipulated by a cold, calculating shadow who truly understood the profound, paralyzing power of absolute absence. The investigating authorities currently possess an incredibly vast, intricate map of a highly sophisticated cyber deception campaign, but they are still desperately lacking the only crucial piece of information that truly matters to the devastated family desperately waiting in the quiet desert home. The ultimate haunting question that continues to echo endlessly through the empty residential hallways and the tense, silent police precincts has not fundamentally changed since the freezing morning of February 1st. Despite all the brilliant behavioral profiling presented on television, despite the exhaustive, panicked international border checks, and despite the unprecedented, highly innovative deployment of specialized medical tracking technology, the entire sprawling federal law enforcement apparatus still cannot definitively answer the single, heartbreaking inquiry that originally launched the massive global manhunt. Where exactly is the missing elderly woman? The brilliant, flawlessly executed digital camouflage successfully deployed by the unknown perpetrator continues to perfectly shroud the grim physical reality of the violent extraction. The open case officially stands as a chilling, monumental testament to the terrifying reality that a human being can still vanish completely without a single trace, even when the entire connected world is actively watching and every sophisticated digital sensor is fully activated. The promise of modern technology utterly failed to penetrate the physical darkness, leaving behind a grim legacy of agonizing, unanswered questions and a profound, lingering silence that offers absolutely zero comfort or resolution to those tragically left behind in the agonizing wake of the violent crime. This unprecedented investigation provides a chilling masterclass in the highly specialized field of forensic linguistics and behavioral threat assessment. The most critical, actionable lesson extracted from this ongoing nightmare is learning exactly how to differentiate between a genuine extortion attempt and a highly engineered, malicious fabrication designed to deceive. The absolute perfection of the sentence structure within the threatening correspondence, when fatally combined with the complete absence of a verifiable photograph or audio recording proving the victim is still alive, functions as a massive, glaring forensic signpost. In the analytical, deeply logical realm of criminal profiling, this specific combination of flawless grammar and missing proof explicitly reveals that the true motive of the unseen author is absolutely not financial gain, but rather deliberate, psychological manipulation, and tactical misdirection. Furthermore, What this complex case teaches us about our collective digital vulnerability is profoundly unsettling. We exist in a modern era where we implicitly trust that an interconnected web of smart devices, residential security lenses, and ubiquitous communication networks will perfectly document every single event. However, this baffling disappearance ruthlessly exposes the terrifying reality of the metadata gap. When a highly intelligent predator fundamentally understands the technical limitations of these interconnected systems, they can easily and devastatingly exploit those blind spots. They recognize that a strategically timed, untraceable electronic message can effortlessly force an entire federal intelligence apparatus to blindly chase a digital ghost while the crucial physical evidence slowly degrades in the real world. Advanced surveillance technology is absolutely not a magical solution. If the human actively operating in the shadows possesses the explicit knowledge of exactly how to become completely invisible to the tracking algorithm, the sprawling digital net fundamentally only catches the criminals who actually make careless mistakes, leaving the truly disciplined predators entirely free to manipulate the security system from the outside. The ultimate legacy of this unresolved mystery is the terrifying contrast between the chaotic explosion of digital noise and the impenetrable silence of the actual perpetrator. The relentless flood of tips, the aggressive media broadcasts, and the forged extortion demands created a blinding storm of data that ultimately signified absolutely nothing. The Phantom Architect orchestrated the terrifying chaos and then quietly vanished, leaving the authorities to desperately interrogate an empty digital void. If a disciplined individual can successfully freeze the entire cyber division of the federal government simply by refusing to establish a functional communication channel, we must ask a deeply terrifying question. Is the modern, technologically advanced criminal actively evolving faster than the sophisticated investigators tasked with hunting them down? In our next research video, we will open a completely different case file where the digital footprints did not lead to an agonizing dead end, but instead functioned as the ultimate betrayer of a killer who thought they were completely untraceable. Thank you for analyzing the evidence with me today. Make sure to enable your notifications so you never miss the next complex investigation we deconstruct here on Tracking Evil with John. Stay safe, stay highly vigilant, and always stay questioning the presented narrative.